The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening, hello, and welcome. Yes, indeed, welcome. This is Hayes Reviews. My name is Nick. I'm the creator of this channel, and it's very lovely to have you here. This is a Saturday evening. This is our Saturday evening broadcast, and tonight we have an exciting episode because we are wrapping up the book that we've been reading for the last 2 months. I think it's taken us about 2 months to get through this one, and it has been an exciting journey to say the least. What an incredibly instructive time we've had. So if you're just tuning in, you're new to the show, please have a look in the playlist section on the channel and you can see the full playlist of our reading of The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond B. Fosdick. Tonight is part 13 and it's going to be the final part in the reading of this book. So it's the longest book we've read, 13 parts. Each one of those is anywhere between an hour and a half to 3 hours long. So it's a lot of material. It's taken us a while to get through it. And I've been trying to pad out some of these episodes with further resources, some information about the context, some further avenues for exploration, and also some solutions to the kind of problems which we've been learning about in this book. And so welcome if you are new, but maybe go back and at some point catch up on the previous 12 videos because tonight's going to be the conclusion. And the conclusion might not make a lot of sense if you haven't checked out the beginning and the middle first. But that's not to say I'm sending you away or anything. If you are new, stick around, please, because I'm sure you will gain something from this broadcast. So thank you for being here. And yeah, what a book it's been. The Rockefeller Foundation, I think, is one of those groups. It's one of those families. It's one of those names. The many people who wake up and start becoming curious about the way the world works, they sooner or later stumble upon the Rockefellers. And then you start hearing this name and you hear about the foundation and you hear about Nelson Rockefeller, who was the vice president of America. You hear about John D. Rockefeller. You hear about junior and senior. You hear about David Rockefeller and the amazing quote in his book of memoirs where he admits to being part of a group of internationalists who work against the best interests of the United States. And it's quite amazing to hear this stuff, particularly for the first time. And you might have this feeling of incredulity. You might be incredulous, and that's a really good feeling to have. You should be suspicious and skeptical of everything you hear, particularly in the modern day where so much information is artificial. It is created by algorithms. It is created by influencers, people who want your clicks and your attention to lead you off the path and down rabbit holes and into dead ends and round in circles. This is the era that we live in, right? So when you start to hear about these groups such as the Rockefellers, it's good to be incredulous and say, what? That's hard to believe. And then the next step, though, so be incredulous, but the next step is I'm going to look into that and check it out for myself. Okay. So you don't just say, oh, that's crazy. That doesn't sound right. I don't believe it. And then go back to watching Coronation Street, right? You say, that's crazy. That sounds wild. That's really hard to believe. I'm going to check it out and look into it for myself. And that is what I started doing. And it is what led to the creation of this channel and what led to video series such as this one that you're now watching, where we're reading this book. Yeah. This book was written by the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, the first president. He was a president for between 10 and 30 years, depending on where which source you look at. There's different numbers thrown out there, but he was right there at the forefront of it, overseeing it, and he retired in later life after a long career being involved in the League of Nations and in banking and in this charitable philanthropic foundation. He retired and he started writing books, and he wrote this one and he published it in 1953 or 52. I forget, one of those. And he published it. And this is the story of the Rockefeller Foundation by the people who ran it, by the man who oversaw it. So it's not spin. It's not some crackpot conspiracy theory book that's been written with no references and no evidence to back it up. This is what they say about themselves, right? That's the amazing thing about this book. And oh boy, the things we have learned on this journey, the things that they have said about themselves, it's incredible. Some amazing admissions in here with regards to where the money goes and who they funded, names, projects, the Manhattan Project for one, in terms of names. You've got Alfred Kinsey. These are the kind of people in the project this money's going to from this foundation. And you might say, well, they didn't know at the time, did they? They couldn't have foreseen where all this money was going. Could they not? Or is it more like they chose where the money would go because they knew who would do their bidding, right? Because any money that gets given and sent or donated or injected or invested always comes with strings. There's always strings attached. There's no free lunch in this world. There's no money for nothing, okay? Parents out there, you probably bribe your children every now and again. Here, I'll give you a $5. Go and mow the lawn or something. You know, money really gets people motivated, and the people who have the money to give out get to largely dictate what the people who need the money in order to live and pay their bills and mortgages and buy nice things for their family and, you know, put their children through school and all these kind of things. They tend to do whatever the people with the money want them to do, right? Because we've been cornered in a situation where we are forced to use this product, which is created by these central banks, which is, if we choose not to use it and we find other methods, or we create our own money, or we barter, or we try to operate outside their systems, we get chucked in a cage or we get our businesses shut down, or we get all sorts of other nasty consequences laid on us. And so it's very much worth looking at who's doling out this money. And the idea that they're doing it without any strings attached and giving it to people to just do whatever you want to do, just no requirements, no stipulations, no guidance from us, just boom, here's millions of dollars and just carry on doing what you want to do. That's laughable. Let's be honest. That is really laughable. And if you believe that, that's a cartoon version of reality, and you should really not believe it and, catch up on this series of videos and check out some of my comments and context and some of the conversations we've been having in the chat. And you'll see that that idea that this money is just given and then there's no stipulations or control over the people it's given to or the organizations it's given to, that's a very laughable, silly idea, right? So yes, that is my intro for today. So it's good to see people here in the chat. We have got LJ and Gwen and we've got Frank, and we have also got Plutonian Productions. So good evening or good afternoon to you all. We got a few different countries, which is lovely to see. And thank you all for being here. I know it's Saturday. It's the most exciting day of the week. It's the day that most people live for, and they're just counting down to Saturday. So I appreciate you being here with me tonight to round off this book and to finally put a line under it and to have that like good, satisfying feeling of having finished a book. But also slightly sad, you know. I am kind of, I always have mixed feelings about getting to the end of a book. While I like it because I'm a bit of a completionist, I also feel a bit like, oh, now it's time to move on to something else, and you're never quite sure what the next thing is going to be. And I think this one has been a watershed moment in my work and the history of this channel, because it's really come together in terms of what I'm trying to do here, which is provide that evidence, provide that context to what's going on in the modern world to help people understand it. And this book has really been, because it's been a crazy just revelation of truthful things, right? There's no reason to doubt or disbelieve anything really that Raymond Fosdick says in this book, apart from, oh, we all did it for the benefit of humanity and because we care about everyone and we love everyone so much. And the reason we have to doubt that narrative is because we can look at what happened in the last 70 years, you know. From the 50s, this book was written, the foundation itself was operating decades and decades before that. But all we have to do, like the age-old saying goes, is you will know them by their fruits, yeah? Actions speak louder than words. And I shared a quote today, I think it was on Instagram, and it was words to the effect of, I can't hear what you're saying because your actions are too loud. And I thought that was a fantastic quote and very a good one to remember, that actions really do tell us a lot more than the words, right? So they can write their white papers and their books, and they can write their official histories, and they can say, this is why we did what we did and how we did it and what the reasons were. But just look at the world we live in. Look at the people who are getting maimed and hurt and harmed by the allopathic Western medical system that the Rockefellers funded and exported all over the planet. Just look at the toxic food that is eaten on a daily basis by many people who are totally unaware and oblivious. Just look at the garbage media that people consume through the radio and the television and the internet. Rockefellers funded that back in the day. They funded radio programs, television programs. They funded drama students, right? The other thing we learned in the last reading was the Rockefellers' funding of the humanities in universities and awarding thousands upon thousands of scholarships, but they called them fellowships, Rockefeller Fellows, they were called. And these are like the Klaus Schwab's WEF young global leaders who are penetrating the cabinets all over the world. Well, the Rockefellers were doing that way before Klaus was on the scene, and they were penetrating hospitals, universities. They were penetrating everything, every institution you can think of. They were getting people and putting them in there. And so it's just been an incredible eye-opening thing to see. Yes, LJ says saturation. That is the perfect word for it. It's getting everyone in everywhere and doing it for long enough, over a long enough timeline, so that now so many of us are born into a system. We go through our schooling, and the worldview that we are given is the one that we discussed on the last broadcast, which is the secular humanism worldview. Okay, and that was a whole hour-long introduction, so I won't go into it all right now. But it was very critical in understanding when I think you could lay down the case that largely what the Rockefellers did was they funded the propagation of secular humanism around the world. And so the next question is, what is secular humanism? In a word, it's relativism. Moral relativism, ethical relativism on every single level. Yeah. And relativism, in case you didn't know, is an incoherent, nonsense, illogical way to view the world. It doesn't make any sense, but what does it lead to? Well, it leads to might makes right. It leads to dog eat dog. It leads to kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. It leads also to my truth. You can't deny my truth. My lived experience is the most important thing, and everyone has to protect and respect my lived experience and my truth is different to your truth, and all these kind of irreconcilable, harmful, divisive worldviews where each one of us is now in a little atomistic universe that's not quite the same as anyone else's, because we all have our all sets of touch points, cultural touch points and beliefs and values. And so there's no overlap, and it degrades families, it degrades communities, it degrades national culture, right? So, and then coupled with the movement and the migration of people, which we also found out Rockefellers were funding that as well. They're funding people to come over to one country and study there for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and then go back to their own country. And as I was saying, that when you do that, you can never quite fit back in again when you go home, right? And that serves to break these things down. So the families being broken down, the communities are being broken down, national identities being broken down, religion and spiritual practices being broken down and replaced for this idea of scientism and the worship of the human being, the individual human, and whatever the human needs to do to be happy. And as Plutonian Production says, no right or no wrong, no good, no evil, just whatever makes you happy is the right thing to do. So you can go and spend your life, sniffing cocaine and having risky sexual encounters with less than wholesome individuals. And that's fine, because if it makes you happy, no one can tell you that that's wrong. And I think you can extrapolate from that example the darker areas and the topics and behaviors that could go into, which this kind of worldview would justify or would seem to justify, right? LJ says little gods. Yeah. Little g gods. So instead of the concept or the idea of a one supreme creator that is responsible for the world, the design and the intricate, beautiful balance and systems that we are here and part of, instead of that, each one of us is our own little god, and we have the ultimate power to create our reality, and it's just a recipe for absolute chaos. I mean, we're living through it, right? So you don't need me to describe it. You probably just need to look around at the people close to you and maybe the circles that you move around in, the things that are going on in the world. It is absolute strange times, to say the least. But as a remedy to that, what do we try and do here? Well, we try and take a step back from the recent news happenings, the constant bombardment of this stories and that story, and these just insane, never-ending news cycle that you can never catch up with. It's a treadmill, it's a hamster wheel. You can never catch up. And right, we take a step back from that frenetic, busy, intense, overwhelming flood of information, and we look at the artifacts and the historical books. And a book by its very nature requires a slower unfolding. It requires a little more attention over a longer amount of time. It's not a quick fix. It's not a quick hit of dopamine or serotonin. It's not a scroll to the next one, a 1-minute blast of information. It's a slower pace. It's a pace that's more in tune with nature, with the changing of the seasons, with the day and night cycle, with the waking and rising of the sun and the setting in the evening and the moon, these longer cycles, because we know that reality it has a sort of rhythm to it. And I think what we're trying to do here is slow down a bit. And I know I just opened with a really frenetic, long rant, so saying slow down at this point is probably a little bit hypocritical, but we can slow down. We've taken nearly 30 hours to get through this book, right? And so you're now empowered. Those of you who've been through these videos, or a lot of them, you're empowered with a lot more in-depth knowledge and learning and research than somebody who writes this stuff off. Somebody says to you, oh, the Rockefeller, it's just a foundation. They're philanthropic and they're good and they do good things. You can know that you've invested a decent amount of time into actually learning the truth, learning more information to a higher resolution than other people. And, that's a very empowering feeling. It's a good situation to be in when it comes to discussing and talking about these other things. And so I think, yes, I am exactly romanticizing reading. That is exactly what I'm doing. So get into it. Let my enthusiasm rub off on you. But if you're not up for reading, or you don't have the time and all that stuff, that's why this show is here. That's why I'm here doing what I do, to give you another avenue and another way to get this information if you don't want to sit down and read it yourself. So let's move on with the actual show, shall we? Yes. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today is Norman Dodd. So I'm glad you're here, Plutonian Productions, because the other day I completely fluffed. My memory let me down and I couldn't remember the name of this Reese committee. And you sent me a message saying it was the Reese committee, and I'm very thankful for that. And that's what I love about having a community of people involved. I can't remember everything. I don't have a photographic memory and an incredible recall for all this information. But, you know, if there's a group of us, there's a community, we can help each other, and that reinforces it. And I'm less likely to forget it next time now, because I forgot it once and I said, oh, I can't quite remember. And then Plutonian, you jumped in, you passed me the ball. I fumbled the ball and you passed it back to me. And now I'm more likely to remember it in the future. And you know, that's why we try and do this in teams and groups and communities, because it just helps. More brains turned to the learning and the memory of information is just more powerful than one brain, isn't it? I mean, that's just maths. So this character, Norman Dodd, who is he and why am I talking about him? Well, Norman Paul Dodd was an American banker and bank manager who worked as a financial advisor and served as chief investigator in 1953 for the Special Committee on Tax-Exempt Foundations, commonly referred to as the Reese Committee. So the Reese Committee is the Special Committee. It's kind of a confusingly worded. Tax-exempt foundations. The way it's worded sounds like the tax-exempt foundations are commonly referred to as the Reese Committee. That's not what it's saying. The Reese Committee was investigating the tax-exempt foundations, one of which is the Rockefeller Foundation, which we've been reading about and learning about, okay? So B. Carroll Reese was the chair, and he was a U.S. congressman on this special committee. And Dodd was known primarily for his controversial investigation. So right up front, Wikipedia is trying to get us to doubt or disbelieve by telling us that it was a controversial investigation. Don't you know? A lot of people will kind of fill in the blanks when they see the word controversial and think, oh, that must mean it was in doubt or untrue or somehow unreliable, but that's why they call it a controversial investigation, you know? So key point here as well, Norman Dodd was interviewed shortly before he died by the journalist G. Edward Griffin. Fantastic gentleman is G. Edward Griffin. He has been at this for a very long time. He has some incredible interviews and videos and documentaries, and he's still alive and he's still working hard. And I've mentioned him in the last few videos, in fact, and we will get to mentioning him again a little bit later. But for now, we're sticking with Norman Dodd, whose early life was pretty interesting. But, you know, he was born, he had parents, usual stuff, went to school. But look at this. He was, by his own words, an indefatigable reader. So talk about romancing reading. I think this is a great word and something we should aspire to. You want to be an indefatigable reader. You know, you want to be someone who's going to read no matter what. I think it's a more powerful way to spend your time and to utilize your mind than watching the videos or even listening to the audio, because ultimately watching and listening are more on the passive side of activity. Unless you might be taking notes, you know, you might be sketching things down, and that's a bit more active. Reading, it's hard to be a passive reader. You really, because you got to hold the book and you're scanning, your eyes are going across the page, and then you're linking the ideas together, and your imagination is being activated, and other things are firing off, and it just activates more of your brain. It's just more of an active thing to do is reading. So yes, let's all try to be indefatigable readers. But to me, that says a lot about this character, Norman Dodd. It tells me a lot about him and his character and his personality. We also learn that during or after the 1929 stock market crash, he was assigned by his superiors the task of restructuring the bank he was working at, after a period of which he recommended what at the time was referred to as sound banking. That would be nice, wouldn't it? If it existed. He was told by his superiors that his recommendations would not be implemented because, quote, "we will never see sound banking in the United States again." Very interesting quote. Suggests that there used to be sound banking in the United States. But after this crash, 1929, he was told that it would never come back. How did they know that? Why was that their position? Why were they saying that? You know. So quite a revealing quote. I'd like to know where it came from as well. We don't have a footnote for that, unfortunately. But moving on to the tax-exempt foundations, Dodd's claims about his investigative work have become the cornerstone of theories implicating the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Ford Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation, among others. What is significant to me about this word theories here is that it doesn't have the word conspiracy in front of it. So I was very surprised because even Wikipedia cannot bring itself to try and smear and tarnish the findings of Norman Dodd and his commission with that useless label that is just designed to switch people's brains off. Conspiracy theory, right? So even they're saying these are theories. But yeah, you got the big ones implicated: Carnegie, Endowment, Ford, and Rockefeller. So we've been studying the Rockefeller. He stated in his findings that many foundations were intentionally campaigning to involve the United States in such wars as World War I, and that they also sought ways to warp American teaching of history through explicit control of the education system in the United States. Rene Wormser, the legal counsel to the Reece Committee, wrote in his 1958 book on the subject, quote, "It is difficult for the public to understand that some of the great foundations which have done so much for us in some fields have acted tragically against the public interest in others. But the facts are there for the unprejudiced to recognize. So this book, 1958 book, remember that, because I'm going to mention that very shortly soon. But yeah, it's incredibly damning statements about these foundations, which we are told are benevolent and beneficent and magnanimous and just exist for the benefit of all, right? And then interestingly, the Norman Dodd collection at the Rosalind Cress Haley Library, which is in St. Louis, Missouri, contains books from Norman Dodd's personal library. Now, wouldn't it be good to get in there and have a look? So anyone who lives in St. Louis, Missouri, maybe you want to get down there and have a check out some of those books. Could be quite instructive. So that's a little bit about Norman Dodd. And this Reece Committee is something that's very much worth learning about. I haven't gone into the Wikipedia page on the committee itself, but you can do that in your own time. I got down to the bottom, though, and had a look at these references. And I clicked all 4 of them. And so the top one, this was, let's see, where's reference number 1? This is to do with Norman attending private schools. This link was not found. So that was helpful. So I went to the second, and this was the Dodd Report to the Reece Committee on Foundations, 1954. Robber Baron hijacking of the USA. You must log in to view this content. Thank you very much. You must give me your data. I want to know who you are, your name, your email address, and where you're logging in from in order to read this, presumably because they're going to put you on some kind of list. So I didn't get to see that. So I went to the third footnote for the Wikipedia article, and it sent me here. And this is the subsequent. This is a later release of Rene Wormser's book, Foundations, Their Power and Influence. This is a 1993 release. So we'll just have a look at the description. This is a searching analysis of some of America's most powerful tax-exempt foundations, their actions as opposed to their stated purposes, the interlocking groups of men who run them, and their influence on the country at large. So I really like that it emphasizes the actions instead of the stated purpose here, because that's what I was saying earlier, right? The Reece investigation was virtually hamstrung from the start to its early demise, which was aided and abetted by leading newspaper of the country. So that bit I didn't know, but it's not surprising, right? That the Reece investigation, along with the Warren Commission into the JFK assassination, along with the 9/11 Commission into the Big 9 event, these things get set up in a way which is guaranteed to ensure that they do not uncover the truth of the thing that they're supposedly investigating. And then a good quote here from the book: "The power of the individual foundation giant is enormous. When there is like-mindedness among a group of these giants, which apparently is due to the existence of a closely knit group of professional administrators in the social science field, the power is magnified hugely. When such foundations do good, they justify the tax-exempt status which the people grant them. When they do harm, it can be immense harm. There is virtually no counterforce to oppose them. Now that last line there should send chills down your spine. Imagine. So these are not conspiracy theorists just writing, crazy books that are unsubstantiated. These are people commissioned to investigate the foundations. This is their words. This is his findings in his own words after he's been asked to look into these groups. So chilling, I would say, to say the least. Sounds like Plutonium has read this book and he's saying that it is great. So I'm glad. I haven't read it and I haven't got it, if you can believe that. And it's true. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is that some copies of this are abridged. So if you are going to invest in a copy, take a bit of time, try and get an older version and make sure it's not an abridged copy, because you never know if people have chopped out important passages or quotes or information. You always want to try and get the full edition, an earlier copy if you can. I tend to think the older books have been messed with the least. And so the fourth, so then what I did next was like, okay, maybe I can dig up a PDF, right? Where this is the age of the internet. The internet is supposed to democratize information, make it available to us all. The author of this book is, no longer with us. Rest his soul. And so, perhaps there's probably a PDF out there that we can just grab and then we can read it and have a look at it. So you can see from the color of these links that I clicked on all of these, and I'll show you how useful and helpful that was. So firstly, I got to archive where it said the item is not available due to issues with the item's content. So I don't know what that means. You can make your own mind up what that means. Again, Internet Archive's telling me I got to log in. So I said, no, I'm not logging in. Thank you very much. Another one said, site not found. We're unable to locate this site. And then finally on Scribd, I did manage to see this, and I was like, oh, good, page 1, 438 pages, a button to download it, lovely jubbly, download to read ad-free, fantastic, I'll do that. Clicked it, and it wants me to log in, and I'm not logging in. So I still haven't got a PDF of it. A good bit of info on the description here, though. Renee Wormser was the counsel for a congressional committee commissioned to investigate the great tax-exempt foundations. Despite opposition from the media and the financial elite, the committee discovered that the foundations were working in education, government, and the media to convert our country, so that's America, into a socialist nation. The book documents the power of the tax-exempt foundations and how they used that power to subvert a nation. So Scribd didn't even turn up the goods, unfortunately. So at that point, I went over to eBay, and actually there's quite a lot of copies of this on eBay. But as I mentioned before, you can see this one here actually says, has a little abridged sticker on the front, so I would stay away from that one. And then I would go to maybe get one of these hardback versions and just try and find the one that's like an older copy. It says this was, I think, released in the 50s. I haven't seen a single copy of it that's older than the 90s. So if you can get your hands on like an original first edition from the 1950s, I would snap that up, because I can't find one online. So that's Foundations. Now, a couple of resources for further learning and further context. This video here, which I'll play a little bit, is G. Edward Griffin and his interview with Norman Dodd, the man we've just been learning about on Wikipedia. And you can have a guess and a kind of sense of how old this video is just by looking at the text and the graphics and this line across the bottom here. This looks to me like it's been converted from a VHS format. And this is G. Edward Griffin back in the day doing his thing. And this is Norman Dodd. And this interview is one of those you want to download and preserve it, and make copies and send it out to people, because it's incredibly enlightening. And he talks through every step of what he discovered and how it all came to light, right? And let's see, so this video, I don't know, maybe it was in the 80s, I think. Anyway, you got a lot of context under there if you want to look into that even more. And another website, American Deception, too. So this website has the Reese Committee hearing on it, apparently. So you can read it for yourself. So that's a very useful resource. And G. Edward Griffin, and people who've been watching the last few videos will know I've been reminding people about this Red Pill Expo that's coming up. This is G. Edward Griffin's event. It's got a bunch of speakers. You can attend in person. You can attend online. And Sarah Westall, Andrew Kaufman, David Webb, G. Edward Griffin himself. You just know that he's going to be bringing together some excellent speakers, and he's incredible too. I've watched recent videos of him, and he's still sharp. He's still very articulate, still able to get his mouth around the words, not stumble, not do what I just did and hesitate and use these filler sounds. Incredible guy to listen to, still sharp as a tack at his age. So it's wonderful to see. And that's another resource for you to edify yourself. And I think that might be it for last but not least, this was shared in our Telegram group, I should say, for Hayes Reviews. This was shared by Heidi. Big thank you to Heidi. And this is a podcast episode of someone who does the kind of thing that I do. He's got a copy of the book. And this was streamed 2 years ago. And look at that. Fantastic. Look at this guy. So he's read it ahead of time, highlighted it, and now he's gone back to broadcast it and teach people from it. And what is the book? Let's see. I think he just showed the cover. The book is the one we've just been talking about. There it is. So that's The Foundations, Renee Wormser, Their Power and Influence. So another resource, and you can have a taste of what's in the book. You can see the words on the page. He's got a similar idea to me. Does that say Kinsey? I think that says Kinsey there. So it looks like there might be something here about how there we are. Rockefeller finances Dr. Kinsey's scientism. How about that? That was one of the biggest revelations to me from this Rockefeller book, was funding Alfred Kinsey. So pretty just synchronistic that I paused it on this page, and there it is, Rockefeller financing Dr. Kinsey. So we know that this bit is verified because we've read it in this book right here. And I reckon that is another good resource. Frank as well in the Hayes Reviews chat has been through it, I think twice, he said now, and found value from multiple listenings. So there you are. That is going to be linked under this video as well. And that brings us to the end of our little ramble for today. So I'm going to move some screens around, have a check of the comments, and then we'll get into the book. We've got 2 chapters to read today. And those 2 chapters are The Evolution of Principles and Practices. That's chapter 23. And then we've got chapter 24, which is just called Perspective. And so I'm not quite sure what is going to be in store in these 2 chapters, but I am excited to find out. Okay, let's have a little look. Peter's here. Good evening, sir. Or morning, or whatever it is where you are, because I think you're in Australia. So, yeah. So Peter says, I randomly visit libraries to see what is for sale. That's a very good idea. Plutonian says, I haven't read Foundations, just heard it mentioned dozens of times from Alan Watt. Yeah, same here. I've heard it mentioned so many times that I think I'm surprised that I haven't bought it yet and added it to my collection, but I'm sure I'll grab a copy at some point. Looks like we've got some discussions here about the carnival freak show that is Modern Politics. And Peter says all our bookshops keep disappearing. That is a tragedy and quite alarming. We've got a lot of secondhand bookshops here, but I don't think it'll last for very long. You know, I've been trying to hoover up as much as I can, but finding the time to go around them and check, and that's tricky. Yeah, so I think that is it. And I think it's about time to go over to the book cam and go embark upon the final leg of this journey. And I'm so grateful to everyone who's been here. I know Peter, LJ, I know Frank, I know Gwen. You've all been here, if not every video, then almost every video. And for that, I am sincerely thankful. And I think you will admit it has been quite a journey, and one that has been very much worth taking together. But, you know, if you haven't been here for every video, I'm still very grateful to you as well, of course. But make sure you catch up on the ones you missed, because pretty much every chapter has been juicy in one way or another, I would say. Okay, so let's do this. So we got chapter 23, and this is the evolution of principles and practices. It is now nearly 40 years since the Rockefeller Foundation was launched on its far-flung work. During this period, principles and practices have evolved, methods have been shaped by experience, and techniques have developed from trial and error. Some of these principles and ideas have their roots in the years of association of Mr. Rockefeller and Mr. Gates, long before the foundation was created. Others represent a gradual evolution, based on new conditions and a changing social environment. Excuse me. Because the Rockefeller Foundation was one of the pioneers in the field, and in point of age is one of the oldest institutions of its kind, it may be of value to outline some of the principles and practices which, although often modified, have guided its work. There is here no implication that these concepts are necessarily applicable to other foundations established under different conditions or for different purposes. They merely represent the accumulated experience and viewpoints developed over years of operation by a single organization. 1. A foundation is not only a private philanthropy, it is affected with a public interest and is, in a real sense, a public trust. Exempt from taxation, it enjoys a favoured legislative status. The grants which it makes are matters of public concern, and public confidence in the foundation as a social instrument must be based on an adequate understanding of its purposes and work. A foundation, therefore, cannot escape the responsibility, moral if not legal, for giving the public, preferably at regular intervals, complete information of its activities and finances. This is a principle which the Rockefeller Foundation has followed practically from the beginning of its work, as early as 1913. Jerome D. Green, the executive secretary, was writing about, quote, the accountability of the Rockefeller Foundation to the people of the United States, end quote, and was trying to devise a systematic method by which the Foundation's activities could obtain the benefit of, quote, public scrutiny, criticism, and publicity. By its creators, the Foundation was regarded as a cooperative enterprise, not a dominating or maybe patronizing force in carrying forward a particular program, but a single factor, and not the controlling factor, in joint undertakings for the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding. Quote, an extra engine to put on to help the train over a stiff grade. This was Dr. Buttrick's homely description of the function of a charitable trust. To create the necessary atmosphere for the development of this conception, the Foundation initiated a system of annual reports, which as the years went by became increasingly comprehensive. Today, they not only contain the entire record of all appropriations and payments, but they give the complete financial picture of the Foundation, including a list of securities held with ledger and market values, all transactions during the year related to invested funds, and the balance sheet with income and expense account. In no less a way can the essentially public nature of the responsibilities of a foundation, as evidenced by its exemption from taxation, be adequately discharged. I just find it really weird that, when you and I are taxed, it's for the benefit of the public. And we're kind of told, well, it's the price you pay for living in a civilized society. But being exempt from taxation is evidence of the foundation's public nature. Like, try and square that circle if you can. Great advantage accrues from an elastic charter which gives the trustees full responsibility for the operation of the organization and the use of funds. This was Mr. Rockefeller's unique contribution to the foundation which he created. He trusted the future. He did not think that benevolence and wisdom were confined to his time, and he had a healthy skepticism of the ability of one generation to foresee the needs and requirements of the next. He left to future trustees the interpretation of the general objective of the Charter, the well-being of mankind throughout the world. Realizing that the interpretation would change from decade to decade as human problems changed. Because he mistrusted organizations set up in perpetuity, he gave the trustees full power to spend the principal as well as the income of the fund. Perpetuity is a pretty long time, he dryly remarked. In the 4 decades of its operation, the trustees have appropriated approximately $125 million from principal as challenging opportunities presented themselves which could not easily be avoided. This does not necessarily mean that this same policy will be continued in the future, because the Board of Trustees is always free to adjust its practices to new situations and new points of view. But in the world of sweeping change and insecurity in which we live at the present time, a world which Mr. Rockefeller did not live to see, the essential wisdom of the completely elastic and flexible charter he gave the foundation seems abundantly clear. The grants of a foundation should not be tied up to rigid and unchangeable purposes. A charitable trust should not serve as an instrument to aid an outmoded past in imposing itself on a new kind of future. Unfortunately, the history of charitable trusts contains too many tragic spectacles of large masses of property settled to unalterable uses. In endowing what they thought was of permanent importance, earlier generations made wrong guesses which embarrass us today. How can we assume that our guesses have any greater validity or are made with any clearer foresight? This was the philosophy behind the action taken by the trustees of the Rockefeller Foundation in 1937, under which recipients, past and present, were advised that it was the desire of the foundation that the gift, quote, whether the income only is spent or the principal as well, shall always be regarded as available for us in the broadest way, so as best to promote the general purpose for which it was made, end quote. The liberalizing act relating to all future grants for endowment, and also, as far as permitted by law, to past gifts, contained the following provisions. 1. 10 years after the date of the gift, the income from it may be used in whole or in part for some purpose other than that for which the gift was made. Such purpose to be as reasonably related to the original purpose as may be found practicable at the time, having regard to intervening changing conditions. 2. Beginning 5 years after the date of the gift, 5% of the principal of the fund may be used each year for any purpose for which income may then be used. 3. After the expiration of 25 years, any part or the whole of the principal may be used for some other purpose. The new purpose, as in point 1, to be as reasonably related to the original purpose as may be found practicable at the time, having regard to intervening changing conditions. So, perfectly clear, and who's there exactly to enforce these rules, to make sure that this is the way it pans out and this is how it happens. These liberalizing provisions represent an attempt to free the future from frozen funds and tired endowments, in the belief that the wisdom of this generation cannot be substituted for the wisdom of the next in the solution of problems hidden from our eyes. Money is a feeble offering without the study behind it which will make its expenditure effective. This is a sentence which Mr. Rockefeller wrote nearly 50 years ago, after a lifetime of experience in what he called the difficult art of giving. The sentence is profoundly true. In relation both to individuals and institutions, Dr. Henry S. Pritchett of the Carnegie Foundation expressed the idea in even more vigorous terms. Somebody must sweat blood with gift money, if its effect is not to do more harm than good. No article in the creed of the Rockefeller Foundation has been more fully substantiated in the 4 decades of its experience. Without unstinted expenditure of time, investigation, and expert competence, nothing permanently constructive can be accomplished merely by the use of money. Effective philanthropy, especially in the main intellectual fields, is by no means a simple and artless affair which anyone with good intentions can handle. Rather, it is a highly specialized, arduous, and complex business. This was the principle that Gates learned from Mr. Rockefeller and Buttrick and Rose from Gates. And it has been passed on to later generations of officers and trustees. Quote, "It requires just as much effort to give away $1,000 as it does to give away $1 million. This dictum, stemming far back in the history of the Foundation, has set the pattern of its work and organization, a pattern based on highly trained personnel, chosen for their knowledge and competence in the various specialized fields into which the Foundation has gone. In the beginning, the Foundation's organization was small. As the program grew, it was necessary to expand the staff, and today some 30 officers, aided by various secretarial, clerical, and special services, are employed in the task of maintaining close contact with ideas and personnel at the frontiers of the various fields of knowledge in which the Foundation is working. In addition to this central staff, 85 men and women are employed in the laboratories and field activities of the Foundation's operating programs in public health and agriculture. Through rigorous schedules of study, travel, and interviewing, these men and women keep the trustees informed of opportunities related to the Foundation's broad objectives, report on progress of efforts currently supported, and mature for consideration specific proposals upon which the trustees take action. Human judgment is fallible, and no organization can hope for a record unspotted by mistakes. Some causes are exceptional, many are worthy, but the majority, although often inspired by the best of motives, are commonplace. To distinguish between the exceptional and the commonplace, to discriminate between promising and pedestrian ideas, to discover where talent lies in terms of human ability, this almost unattainable objective requires patient, meticulous, and conscientious investigation, and nothing can take its place. Once grants are made to responsible groups or institutions, no degree of control over the operation of the grants should be exercised by a foundation. Cut the strings where the gift is made. This has been the evolving policy of the Rockefeller Foundation. So they just gave the money away and didn't with no strings attached, apparently. This has been the evolving policy. The unwisdom of any other course lies in the patent fact that control of a vast number of projects becomes centralized in one institution, with consequences that are practically inefficient and embarrassing, as well as socially unhealthy. If adequate care has been taken in the study and preparation of the project, it is far better to trust the recipient institution to carry it out in good faith than to attempt any type of alien control. Interesting that they use this word alien control, isn't it? Especially when you look at this guy and just how much goodness and humanity gleams from every pore on the surface of his face. Maybe they're trying to give us a little clue there about the true origins of this family. Huh? Every social agency, including a foundation, carries within itself not only the seeds of possible decay, but a tendency to exalt the machinery of organization above the purpose for which the organization was created. As Dr. Pritchett pointed out years ago, business concerns are subject to exactly the same tendencies, but in a business organization there is an ever-present test of efficiency lacking in those agencies that deal with intellectual and social products. A business enterprise is established primarily to make money, and when dividends cease, such is immediately made to determine what is wrong. No such automatic criterion exists to test the efficiency of a social organization. It is always difficult to know whether such an organization is really paying dividends or not. The necessity of constant self-examination, the need of adaptability to changing conditions, have always been present in the thinking of the Rockefeller Foundation. Indeed, on few other principles has so much emphasis been placed. If the work is to be kept out of ruts, if the organization is to avoid frustration and stagnation, programs and methods must be elastic, fresh, alive, and open-minded. This was the point which Mr. Rockefeller Sr. and his son constantly stressed. Writing to the author of this history in 1925, Mr. Rockefeller Jr. said, quote, "Any human institution tends to confuse motion with progress and to exalt machinery and organization above work and objectives. This is certainly true in the business world, and it is equally true in philanthropy. We get so used to following a particular line of activity that the routine and machinery by which it is accomplished takes on a certain sanctity. There is nothing sacred or inviolate about any type of organization. Machinery and personnel are merely the instruments by which objectives are reached. And unless we keep ourselves clear-eyed and fresh and keep the machinery elastic, we run the risk of dry rot." So interesting use of imagery and metaphor here. You've got machinery and personnel very closely connected, almost equated, and personnel defined as instruments by which objectives are reached. So, it'd be interesting to go back and find out when the term human resources started being used, because I always find that term kind of insulting. Human resource. I'm not a resource. I'm a human being. I'm a man on the earth. I'm a living man. Thank you very much. And I would like to be treated and regarded and recognized as such. But interesting here that you've got the machinery, the personnel are instruments, but the actual organization is described as getting dry rot. So it kind of suggests that the organization is organic and living and maybe a tree or something, and then dry rot. I don't know, actually. Does dry rot affect only living things, or is that something that can happen in any like wooden structure? I don't know. If there's a builder in the chat, clear that up for me. But I think you get the point that I'm trying to make. At the very least, machinery and personnel are being equated here, and personnel, people, human beings, men and women, are just a means by which the objectives of the organization can be reached. Anyone who thumbs over the old records of the Foundation will come across constant expression of this point of view, as well as frequent resolutions like the following, passed by the trustees in President Vincent's administration in 1925. Quote, "Resolved, that the officers be requested to keep in mind the importance of constant vigilance in the appraisal of work already in progress, in withdrawal from projects as soon as these are in a position to develop independently, in the termination of administrative units, whether boards or divisions, when conditions justify, and in the consideration of new opportunities, whether these are closely related to present activities or extend into other fields." Nevertheless, the trustees of the Foundation were always aware that flexibility can degenerate into capricious variation. A foundation which shifts its emphasis too often jeopardizes its work. Anxiety about results can undermine the patience necessary in the maturing of long-range plans and ideas. A reasonable compromise has to be established between the principle of elasticity on the one hand, and on the other hand, the kind of tenacity essential to stability. 2. The proper objective of a foundation, unless created for a particularized purpose, is to prime the pump, never to act as a permanent reservoir. So that explains why the Rockefeller Foundation is still active today. Its work is in the field of demonstration, and it cannot wisely, in most cases, assume the burden of permanent support. It should make sure that there will be some well-established agency to carry on the activity that it has initiated or assisted. The proportion of a budget which it provides should not be so large as to discourage support from other sources. Its contributions should not dry up the springs of popular giving. On the other hand, when a foundation withdraws from a project, its withdrawal should not be so precipitate as to wreck the enterprise. A tapering down of contributions over a period of years will, under ordinary circumstances, give an organization a chance to build up stable support from its own natural sources. In undertaking a new line of work, it is better to begin in a small way and progress by trial and error to larger ends. This principle was derived from Mr. Rockefeller's personal experience. Quote, "Nothing great as great begins." The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research was started with a pledge of only $20,000 a year. Late in his life, Dr. Buttrick, appraising the early days of his institution, wrote these revealing sentences. Quote, "I think it was extremely fortunate for the General Education Board that at the beginning it had very little money. If we had had a lot of money, I am afraid we would have made many more mistakes and perhaps never have seen those little germinal ideas which have led us into larger relations." End quote. It must be obvious that the Rockefeller Foundation has not always followed this principle. Sometimes a unique opportunity for public welfare has seemed to justify another approach, but by and large, it can fairly be said that the general pattern of the Foundation's appropriations, modified as conditions demanded, has been based on modest beginnings, followed by increasing support as the record of accomplishment has justified. Scores of instances could be cited to illustrate the procedure, particularly in the development of scientific leadership. A repeating pattern is this: a fellowship, a modest one-year grant in aid, a second grant in aid for perhaps 2 years, a somewhat larger but still modest appropriation for 3 years, and then one or more substantial grants in support of an established research project. Some of the outstanding scientific work, both in the United States and abroad, has been developed by this process. A foundation that operates on a national or international basis cannot wisely concern itself with local charities. The burden should be carried by each community for itself, or as Mr. Rockefeller said years ago, by the people who are on the spot and who are, or should be, most familiar with local needs. Mr. Rockefeller was interested in the more fundamental question. To help the sick and distressed appeals to the kind-hearted always, he said. But to help the investigator who is striving successfully to attack the causes that bring about sickness and distress does not so strongly attract the giver of money. This was written early in the century and would, of course, have to be qualified today. But it stresses a principle which the Foundation has consistently followed. 2 lines of policy were open to the trustees. One was to engage in projects which were remedial and alleviatory. The other was to try to select problems which lie at the root of human difficulties, and which require for their solution, or for any approach to a solution, patience, tenacity, research, careful planning, generalship, and adequate and continuing funds. Because projects of this latter type are always difficult to discover and manage, the temptation is to take the easy road, to do the obvious thing, even if it is something which, because of its popular appeal, other agencies might support, or which ultimately would be taken care of in some other way. The difference between these 2 courses has always seemed to the trustees of the Foundation to be the difference between the less important and the fundamental, between a policy of scattered activities and a policy of relative concentration. For over 30 years in its annual report appeared this sentence, quote, "The Foundation does not make gifts or loans to individuals, or finance patents or altruistic movements involving private profit, or contribute to the building or maintenance of churches, hospitals, or other local organizations." This is the negative side of an affirmative policy. The policy being one of concern for the determining causes of human well-being. A foundation easily falls into the habit of frittering away its funds in an extensive series of small grants. Years ago, Mr. Gates used to thunder against what he called the iniquity of retail giving, and in more recent years, others have scorned the policy of living in the thick of thin things. The argument has been that a foundation capable of making large grants for significant purposes should not scatter its funds thinly over a wide area. With this argument, there can be little quarrel. On the other hand, it is exceedingly questionable whether a rigid line can be drawn against a small gift. Often, a promising development can be brought to fruition with just a few $1,000s. Sir Howard Florey's successful pioneering with penicillin required very little initial financial assistance. The opportunity was ready, and all that was needed was extra laboratory facilities. The best that a foundation can aim to do is to find the strategic opening. This requires a degree of wisdom and imagination, and mistakes are inevitable. In furthering the advance and application of knowledge, bold strokes involving large sums are frequently part of the strategic approach, but sometimes the small gift, rightly placed, can powerfully affect the future. A foundation with wide and intimate contacts can perform a useful function in serving as an unofficial clearinghouse for ideas and plans in many fields. Certainly this has been true of the Rockefeller Foundation. Its officers are in continual touch with promising developments and personnel around the world. The most effective projects it has supported have been developed in the field. These projects have come from close acquaintance with scientists and laboratories, from days and weeks spent on university campuses, from hard journeys on horseback and riverboat to discover the breeding places of disease or the prospects for a new type of corn. The officers thus develop a point of view that is both cumulative and comparative. Consequently, the Foundation has become a center to which research students and universities turn for information, and much of the time of the officers is spent not on questions of financial support, but in discussing with eager inquirers the developments in their fields in other institutions and in other countries. As the late President Keppel of the Carnegie Corporation said, quote, "Much of what one university learns about another is learned in foundation offices." The quality of a foundation's work depends as much on the quality of its trustees as it does on the quality of its officers. Officers require initiative, imagination, curiosity, and an ability to present to the trustees objectively and fairly their findings and recommendations. Trustees have the responsibility not only for the selection of officers, but also for the determination of policy and program. It is their function to maintain balance and proportion, to think in terms of the whole institution and its social consequences rather than its separate parts, to brood, in Mr. Rockefeller Jr.'s happy word, over the performance and aims of the organization against the total background of human need and opportunity. This requires ability of a high order, a judicious type of temperament, an impartial approach. One of the rigidly observed rules of the Rockefeller Foundation is that any trustee personally connected with an organization or institution which is being considered as a recipient of a grant leaves the boardroom during the time that the project is under discussion. Objectivity, perspective, and an ability to see things in the large are indispensable faculties in the equipment of a foundation trustee. Modesty becomes foundations because the question of financial support in all circumstances requires tact and good taste. One of the surest ways of losing credit and gratitude is to lay claim to them. Many institutions, including governments, have this lesson to learn. A thoughtful critic of foundation procedure wrote this comment, which foundation executives might well ponder. Quote, "Nothing is so repugnant as the arrogance of those who presume to impose cultural norms upon a society on no basis or warrant other than pecuniary success under the dispensation of a competitive economy." When Dr. Rose in 1909 wrote out what he called the Principles of Administration of the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission, at the very top of the list he put this sentence, of which mention has already been made. Quote, "The Commission will seek to hide itself behind its work and to keep to the front the local agencies through which the work is being done." End quote. This could well be the motto and spirit of philanthropic foundations. So, quite a, I kind of feel like that chapter should have come at the start of the book. You would lay out the principles and the procedures and straight up. It's kind of weird to throw that in at the end, I think, from my point of view, as as just a reader analyzing, sort of thinking about the structure of a book. Seems kind of odd. But I don't feel like they've really stuck to the things that they've written there and talked about. That's sort of like, that's their public facing image. That's what they say they do. But as we just learned about, and as is admitted on Wikipedia itself, this investigation into the foundations, the Rees Committee, found that they do not do what they say they do. And in fact, they are working against the people of the countries in which they operate. I think the most truthful thing about that chapter we just read is the bit about them working from the shadows behind the scenes and not being publicly known, that it is them who are funding and putting money into the public-facing institutions and individuals that they're backing. Sorry, I didn't mute in time for that sniff there. I've got a bit of a runny nose at the moment for some reason. So yeah, that's kind of my takeaway from that chapter. What do you think? Looks like we've got a few comments. Oh, so dry rot happens to rubber and timber, Peter's saying. Thank you. Yeah, okay. So I thought it was kind of an analogy to the organization being a living entity, whereas the human beings in it are just cogs in the machine, basically. But yeah. LJ is laughing because they're saying that they're transparent. Well, they produce reports every year, so and they wouldn't lie in a report, would they? It's kind of like when it's like we investigated ourselves and we didn't find any evidence of wrongdoing. It's just the same thing, isn't it? It's like, no, we have reports, so and we wrote in our reports about ourselves that we didn't do any crimes, therefore we are honest and we didn't do any crimes, right? But you and I, we get investigated and we have to provide all this evidence. And then if we are found to be lying or whatever, then boom, game over. You're in a cage. Peter says that he only missed one episode and marathoned the previous one when this one was announced. Well, you've got the time. You got the schedule now. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, 7 p.m. So you can plan out the ones you missed and you don't have to listen to them on 2x speed, in which I probably sound like a chipmunk. Peter says, they steal the profits, we suffer the losses. Yeah, this is the public-private partnerships that are being pushed now by the World Economic Forum, by the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals. It's all about public-private partnerships. Ian Davies has a fantastic, the UK investigative journalist and author. He has fantastic investigations and articles into this. Whitney Webb also, Johnny Vedmore, all good people to turn to. UK column also. These public-private partnerships, it is the private interests get the profit and the public pays the investment. So that's a shit deal. A really bad deal. Frank says, when I started into the world of work, I attended at the personnel office. Within a dozen years, it had become the human resources department. Highly dehumanizing. Yeah, good. Not just me then. That's good. So the personnel office, yeah, that would be a better name for it. But no, you're just a resource. And what do you do with a resource? Well, you just use it up until it runs out, don't you? I think this is kind of what's going on in the working world, particularly here in Western countries, is kind of the pension age keeps getting pushed up, and they're just hoping that you drop dead on the job before you reach pension age, so that they don't have to ever pay you out any of that money that they owe you in terms of a pension, right? Or any care or social care costs that you might incur from you living into a ripe old age where you need that kind of support. Plutonian's phone died. Well, I'm glad you could rejoin us. You didn't miss out anything too juicy in that chapter. It was mainly just the Rockefellers or Fosdick telling us that they're very transparent and they only they follow all the rules that they set for themselves, honest. But we all know that the investigation into those committees told a very different and revealed a very different story. Peter saying as well that you can get dry rot on your car tires when the car sits for too long. Okay, thank you. See, this is why I like you guys. I always learn stuff talking to you. LJ, the Inland Revenue always investigates the small businesses. Yeah, Yeah, exactly. So, for the big ones, it's kind of like, yeah, we looked into our books and it's all fine. Don't worry about it over here. And they say, yeah, okay then. Or, Alan Watt actually in a recent video that was shared on the Telegram book club group was talking about how the most theft in the world is white collar theft. And these white collar criminals, they tend to get a slap on the wrist. They tend to get a let off by the judge just because, the public humiliation is enough. They're embarrassed and they've done a public apology. They get a slap on the wrist, and then they just get to go back into their ways of working and do it all over again. But those of us who are not high up in white collar type positions and organizations, we get hammered. If we are found to be cheating or misleading in any way, the hammer falls down very heavy on our heads. But the higher up you are, the easier it is to get away with this kind of thing, right? Plutonian says, good read, sir. I caught a good quote, but can't remember it because I was clipping grass. That's perfect. I mean, clipping grass, painting walls, building fences, all these kind of things. It's the kind of activity you want to be doing while listening to something like this, because then you're getting the productive work done, the physical exercise. You've got something to show for your work at the end of it, but you're also keeping your mind sharp and getting some learning on as well at the same time. So that's it's a great thing to be doing. Good luck with the grass clipping. And it always smells good as well, doesn't it, after you cut it? I don't have any grass in the place where I live at the minute because it's just a rented flat. But I grew up in houses that had grass. It was often my job to cut the lawns, and I hated it. And I would always grumble and groan and drag my feet. But it always smelled so good. Cut grass afterwards. What a smell. Something really magical about that. Something that really agrees with the human olfactory senses. All right. I think I've caught up on the chats. Let's do the final chapter. Raymond B. Fosdick's book, The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation. This is chapter 24. It is called Perspective. In attempting to form any adequate estimate of the work of the Rockefeller Foundation in its first 4 decades, and such an attempt is probably premature, one qualifying circumstance needs to be stressed. Almost from its birth, it was plunged into the cataclysmic years of the 20th century. Sorry again, I just gave you another sniff, didn't I? Sorry about that, everyone. Within a few months after it was launched came Sarajevo and the First World War. So remember that the investigation was found, the book, the René Wormser book, Foundations and Their Power and Influence, and the Reese Committee found that these foundations were encouraging America to get into the First World War and encouraging the First World War to be started, really. They kind of saw it as an opportunity because they had a worldview, they had plans, they had things they wanted to roll out, but people wouldn't accept them. But war, that is the situation where you can push through the most amount of change to a society if you're in these positions of social planners. War affords you the greatest opportunity to get most of those changes implemented because it's just a time of such uncertainty and flux and chaos and confusion and fear. And fear is the best way to get people to accept the stuff you want to do to them, right? So just ironic that they mention it, that he mentions it here in this last chapter. It was 5 years after the armistice in 1918 before anything like a normal world evolved from the chaos. The Great Depression following 1929 had a profound effect on the character of the Foundation's work, and even before the immediate impact of the catastrophe had dissipated, the nations were swept into the Second World War. Of all the years during which the Foundation had operated, scarcely 6 or 7 could by any kind of measurement be called normal. It has carried on its work under a leaking roof, and in retrospect, much of its activity seems to have been a patch and repair job. One looks back on some sections of the record with a feeling akin to dismay. Not that the things done were unwisely conceived or unnecessarily undertaken, but so often they were far removed from the germinal ideas which Gates and Rose and Buttrick used to discuss in the early days of the Foundation. They did not represent the imaginative, creative things that could have been done in even a relatively well-ordered world. The kind of world, for example, that existed in the 2 or 3 decades prior to the establishment of the Foundation. In this sense, an organization dedicated to the welfare of men could scarcely have been launched in a more unpropitious hour. Unpropitious? Unpropitious. Right. I think it's unpropitious, but I'm not sure. One thinks of the vast feeding programs which the Foundation launched in Europe during the famines of the First World War, of the fight on the widespread epidemic of tuberculosis in France, which grew out of the ravages of war, of the millions of books and periodicals distributed to libraries decimated by both wars, of the promising research projects that were disrupted and often crippled as doctors and scientists were drawn into war services, of the creation of public health institutes on a battle-scarred continent, only to have them wiped out or depleted in the Second War, of the assembly of the finest mathematical faculty in the world at Göttingen, which was scattered by Hitler's terrorism, of the Health Institute in Tokyo, which became a military headquarters, of a physics institute in Madrid, standing isolated and unused, of the sums spent to protect the priceless cultural heritage of Europe, paintings, books, manuscripts, architecture, from devastation and loss. Again, the point must be emphasized that all these projects were undoubtedly worthwhile, and the Foundation has reason to be proud of its part in them. What we are faced with is the fundamental antithesis between humane ideas and organizations on the one hand, and on the other hand, the deepening tragedy of the 20th century. The Foundation was a child of the era in which it was born, and it has been shaped by its environment. 2. In spite of this limiting circumstance, the contributions of the Foundation to the intellectual life of the world and the well-being of men can scarcely be questioned. It was one of the early experiments in the voluntary diversion and organized application of great wealth to social ends, and it has met with a measure of success which even its hopeful friends in the beginning scarcely anticipated. "We built better than we knew," said Mr. Rockefeller Sr., writing to Mr. Gates in 1924, and he went on to speak of, quote, "the beneficent results which are so far in advance of our fondest dreams." In fields like public health and agriculture, the Foundation has demonstrated the merit of new ideas, so completely, in fact, that its programs have frequently been taken over by governments, and people have voted to tax themselves to maintain the demonstrations. That's pretty interesting. Quite an telling revelation here that the programs have been taken over by governments. So that's telling you that the goals and the efforts, the systems, the structures, the ways of doing things set up and funded by the Rockefellers then became incorporated into the way governments operate. And, you know, they'll kind of, Fosdick's sort of implying that, the stuff we did was so good that the governments decided to take it over and carry on doing it. But there's earlier chapters where they talk about funding institutes that study public relations and the management of public and public of the public, and government offices that are the Institute of Government, and they have these kind of names, these sort of boring titles that make them they just sound boring, that nobody's interested in what they do because who cares, it's not juicy and it's not exciting, when actually these are the think tanks where the plans are being hatched that we now enjoy, that we live through. These places are where the script is written, in other words, and so I think that's quite a important admission there, that the programs have frequently been taken over by governments, and people have voted to tax themselves to maintain the demonstrations. Really? Is that right, Raymond? I don't remember voting to tax myself. Just looking for my little tabs because I quite like this page. I'm going to tab it up. But it's more likely that the Foundation funded experiments, and then these experiments were based on, how can we rule people and control them and get them to do things, and then certain of those experiments were deemed successful, and then they were carried on by governments because that was the plan all along, to find out how best to rule and control people, and then in order to keep those programs going, they had to tax people. And Fosdick's telling us that we voted to tax ourselves to keep their plans and schemes and projects going. Okay, Raymond. I've lost my place. Here we are. In medicine, psychiatry, and the biological sciences, it has been an invigorating stimulant, aiding materially in the wide advance of knowledge and application which have characterized these subjects in the last 30 years. In the social sciences, it has helped to build integrity and scientific standards into research, pioneering in basic techniques hitherto relatively unexplored. So the social sciences there, that's your things like government, public planning, the administration of the bureaucracy that is, the federal government in the US and the government here, the local councils here in the UK. It's called a science so that people can't object to it, because remember, the kind of dominant ideology in religion is scientism or humanism, which is scientism, humanism, kind of a similar sort of thing. Secular humanism and scientism very largely overlap. And social sciences just kind of means the study of how to control and run society from the top down. But we have the Rockefellers to thank for the integrity and scientific standards that have been pioneered in social sciences. And then in the humanistic studies, so remember, this is the two chapters we did, was it last week or the last reading or the one video before this, which was all about humanism. And that, as I was just saying, secular humanism, the kind of dominant worldview and ideology that these guys are funding and spreading and propagating throughout the world. In the humanistic studies, it has been one of the influences which have assisted in bringing to a broader public not only the traditional values inherited from the past, but new interpretations of value adapted to a new age. It can be said, too, that the foundation has won a place for itself in the confidence and respect of many people in many lands. This could be demonstrated by scores of illustrations, but perhaps a single incident will serve. 2 victims of the Hitler persecutions, who met their deaths in concentration camps, left wills naming the Rockefeller Foundation as a principal beneficiary. What? 2 victims of the Hitler persecutions left wills naming the Rockefeller Foundation as a principal beneficiary. As far as can be discovered, neither of these men had been in contact with the foundation. They did not know each other. One, a Frankfurt physician, interesting, Frankfurt, five brothers from Frankfurt, died probably of malnutrition at the, I can't even pronounce that, Theresienstadt camp. The other, a Hungarian industrialist, was executed in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. He left the foundation nearly $100,000 in a New York bank and other lesser funds in institutions located in Geneva, London, Cairo, and Johannesburg. It would seem that in both cases, the donors looked upon the Rockefeller Foundation as perhaps the one stable organization worthy of their final trust. Wow, so noble. All this on the credit side can truly and objectively be said about the Rockefeller Foundation without in any way detracting from the myriad efforts of hundreds of other agencies working towards the same ends. The age-old task of weaving an adequate pattern of human welfare is, of course, a vast, conjunctive effort, and the foundation has been merely a single thread in a mighty skein. Obviously, there is another side to the picture. No institution is exempt from mistakes and shortcomings, and surely a foundation whose expenditures have run into hundreds of millions of dollars can scarcely be expected to produce a spotless record. No one knows better than the writer, much of whose life has been spent with foundations, how profitless some of the research is, how wide the gap between expenditure and product, how often the promising project ends in nothing but intangible or insignificant generalities. Sometimes the fault lies with the research group or institution. Just as often, perhaps, it reflects the faulty judgment or misguided enthusiasm of the foundation. One of the great temptations that face foundations is to seek for immediate returns, to judge their activities by standards of quick maturing results, forgetting that in many fields growth is a slow process which requires a favorable soil. Dr. Buttrick said years ago, quote, "We may plant a germinal idea and water it and fertilize it, but God, or the nature of things if you please, must give the increase. Foundations are particularly exposed to the evils of immediacy, and too often their work is handicapped by what might be called the lack of a sense of depth in time. A corollary difficulty in the management of foundations, so far as their programs are concerned, relates to their fear of being overreached or imposed upon. This can be a creditable attribute, but it is a handicap when it becomes a chronic state of mind masquerading as caution. Sometimes foundations resent the necessity of giving support to an idea or an institution beyond a predetermined and rather optimistically reckoned date. Estimates of how long new developments in underprivileged countries may take to become self-supporting, naive assumptions about the prospects of men returning from training fellowships, disappointed expectations of the results of surveys and demonstration, all these suggest a lack of tenacity, a poor sense of timing, and an anxiety lest the foundation has been victimized. This anxiety frequently inclines foundations to cut down the periods of grants and to increase the number of projects which seem worthwhile as a trial run. The end result has not infrequently been that men with valuable ideas, whom the foundations are trying to aid, worry themselves into non-productive anxiety about financial uncertainties because of an excess of caution or fear on the part of their supporters. To quote Dr. Buttrick again, and his mellow philosophy about foundations is as pertinent today as it was a quarter of a century ago when he died, quote, "The quality which a foundation needs almost above everything else is tenacity of patience and purpose." Or as Dr. Rose used to say, quote, "Remember, we are not in a hurry." So that to me suggests the Fabian socialist strategy of gradualism. The totalitarian tiptoe, as David Icke might say, this idea of gradual, slow change, which people believe is organic and natural, but actually is planned. The problem is if you rolled out all these changes very suddenly and very quickly all at once, people would see it and they would rebel. So instead, you know where you want to get to, and instead of saying, right, we're going to shove and force and push this through in a short space of time, you say, right, we'll just do a little bit now. And then we'll do a little bit in 10 years' time, and a little bit more in 10 years, and then a little bit more in 10 years. Or sometimes they'll do a few steps forward, 5 steps forward, and then 3 steps back. I think that's what we kind of saw with the Big C event in 2020. It was like 5 steps forward, locking people up, rolling out a digital ID, separating people, tiered access, those who've had the medical intervention, those who haven't had it, you get these privileges and you don't. And they did 5 steps forward, and then they were like, oh, okay, 3 steps back. But they still made 2 steps progress. See, that's how they do it too. And so that's quite a revealing quote as well. Remember, we are not in a hurry. And the most important quality is tenacity of patience and purpose. Of course, a foundation needs knowledge and imagination too, and mistakes are inevitable because human judgment is frail. Perhaps the mistakes are due in considerable degree to lack of what might be called a clairvoyant kind of imagination. So often, a new germinal idea runs completely contrary to accepted opinion. It violates all the canons of current scientific thinking, or it is lodged in some remote and hidden corner. One wonders what would have been the answer of a foundation to Louis Pasteur if he had applied for aid in the development of his strange conception that the process of fermentation and the process of infection are related. Or what assistance from any reasonable foundation could Madame Curie have obtained during those years? With her own hands, she shoveled tons of pitchblende in that old shed in the Rue Lomond. One of the most mysteriously imaginative minds that ever pondered on the deep relations that exist between numbers was to be found, not so many years ago, in the delicate and diseased body of a humble civil servant in India. And at the turn of the century, it was a patent examiner in Zurich who was beginning to see, with amazing clarity and insight, relations between time and space that were presently to revolutionize all scientific thought. To detect genius when it appears, to distinguish between fundamental ideas that are struggling to be born and those that have already safely arrived, to be able to discriminate between the significant and the trivial, This is the difficult, indeed the almost impossible standard by which foundations must measure themselves. These comments and criticisms relate to foundations in general, but in part at least they represent points of view which the trustees and officers of the Rockefeller Foundation, in moments of self-examination, and there have been many, have frequently discussed. No one can claim that these and other difficulties attending the management of a great philanthropic enterprise have all been eliminated from the foundation. But the organization throughout its history has been sensitive to the subtle dangers and weaknesses inherent in the very nature of its responsibilities, and has tried as best it could to avoid them. How far it has succeeded in this ambition is probably not for the present writer to judge, but this much can be said with assurance. The organization has outlived the evil prophecies which attended its birth. That's true. And the evil prophecies which continue to accompany it today. It's still going, it's still alive. Then the emphasis, particularly in the days of the Walsh investigation, was on the irresponsibility of great wealth in the hands of a few trustees, and the temptation to employ this power for unsocial purposes. Fears were frequently expressed that the Rockefeller Foundation would be used to crush trade unionism, or warp education for capitalistic ends, or foster religious strife, or undermine the aims of progressive legislation in promoting forward-looking social practices. The criticism was also made then and later that the foundation was little more than the donor's personal giving, incorporated, that the trustees were not really independent, and that their actions were determined by a small group responsible to the donor's family. Time and the persuasive argument of performance have answered most of these charges. To one who was associated with the foundation for nearly 3 decades, their absurdity is evidenced by the character and high integrity of the trustees. One recalls Charles Evans Hughes with his cool logic and his almost majestic probity, or William Allen White with his massive common sense. I've never heard common sense being described as massive before. Or Ray Lyman Wilbur with his challenging directness and incisiveness. One remembers, too, men like John W. Davis, Owen D. Young, Martin A. Ryerson, Anson Phelps Stokes, Frederick Strauss, Jerome D. Green, Thomas I. Parkinson, Walter Stewart of the Institute for Advanced Study, Ernest Hopkins of Dartmouth, to mention arbitrarily only a few. Men who brought great gifts of detachment and judgment to the deliberations of the board. One thinks of the scrupulousness and high sense of right and honour of Thomas N. Debevoise, who was counsel to the trustees for nearly 2 decades and a half. And there's a footnote which says, the legal advisor to the Rockefeller Foundation is not a trustee, but he attends all meetings of the board and of the executive committee. One recalls with special vividness the modesty and statesmanship of John D. Rockefeller Jr., who served as chairman of the board for 23 years, presiding over its deliberations with an impartiality, a mastery of the relevant. Had a sneeze there. There'll probably be another one along in a minute because these things tend to come in multiples. Who served as chairman of the board for 23 years, presiding over its deliberations with an impartiality, a mastery of the relevant and unfailing courtesy which brought him the respect and affection of the long line of trustees and officers who were associated with him. Footnote says the complete roster of the trustees is given in Appendix 1, and of the principal officers in Appendix 2. These were the men who guided the destiny of the foundation and gave balance and perspective to its program. An organization with such trustees is not necessarily endowed with final wisdom or protected from the human frailty of making mistakes, but neither is it vulnerable to the charge of irresponsible management or disingenuous motives. 3. The foundation, in its modern sense, is almost exclusively an American phenomenon of the 20th century. During the whole of the 19th century, only 7 persons of wealth established foundations in the United States for philanthropic purposes. In the first decade of the 20th century, approximately a dozen new foundations were established, and at least 22 in the second decade. Since 1920, it is estimated new foundations have been created at the rate of over 10 a year. An intelligent critic, not too friendly to foundations, some years ago made a statement which would probably go unchallenged. Quote, "Very few important cultural projects of any size," he said, "are consummated in this country without having experienced either the direct or indirect impact of foundation, philosophy, and influence." The question is, of course, whether the philosophy and influence of foundations are healthy ingredients in American life. Is the stimulus, which they undoubtedly bring to many branches of intellectual effort, offset by the evils which are frequently urged against them? Perhaps the most common of these allegations is that foundations are obsessed by illusions of omniscience or omnipotence, or both. To use the words of President Keppel of the Carnegie Corporation, and that they are destined by their very nature and personnel to be instruments of an outmoded past. This charge has been raised before, and doubtless will be raised again. Any attempt to answer it is embarrassed by the fact that the phenomenon of the modern foundation is of so recent an origin. As a human institution, it is still relatively young and untested. An appraisal of its total assets and liabilities, its contributions and weaknesses, is bound, at the present moment, to lack perspective. Perhaps without presumption, however, the writer may set down two general principles or guiding marks based on long experience, which seem to him to determine the part, at least, whether the attitude of the foundation towards the society of which it is a part is soundly and healthily conceived. In the first place, a foundation should be a pioneering institution rather than a regular source of support for tried and established activities. Its capital is venture capital, and it should be used adventurously. Indeed, its business is to take risks. Its primary obligation is to blaze trails, to find new methods, to explore new ideas, to keep its work, in John Dewey's phrase, close to the growing edge of things, to experiment in areas where public funds cannot readily go, to be prepared for intellectual adventure in developing, for example, an untried therapeutic agent like penicillin, or in making a fresh approach to the teaching of languages. A foundation fulfills its unique promise when it works on the frontiers of knowledge and experience rather than in the more settled areas behind. Moreover, frontiers are never stationary. Sooner or later, they will themselves be settled, and the line will move forward once again. There is no such thing as the status quo in medical research, for example, or in any other kind of research. Facts march. There are no areas of human thinking around which magic circles can be drawn to protect them against possible obsolescence. In physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, and also in the social sciences, each generation, with new light thrown by better instruments of precision or by more delicate apprehension, corrects the mistakes of its predecessors and makes a few of its own. So in other words, it's just all progress. Hypotheses serve their purpose and are then given honourable retirement when better ones appear. In the field of science, and in human relations as well, the problem is never finally solved. The last word is never said. Knowledge, like life itself, is dynamic and not static. An understanding of what might be called the biological inevitability of change, and a broad sympathy with intellectual and adventure must be the basis of any organization whose sincere objective is the welfare of men, particularly when one of its main approaches is through the extension of knowledge. In the second place, promising men and creative ideas are basic and fundamental, and they are far more important than money. The best that a foundation can aim to do is to put its support in the right place at the right time. The most that it accomplishes is to expedite the development of ideas which, without help, might be retarded. And that'll be retarded in the true meaning of the word, which is to slow down. There is a common fallacy, and even some foundation executives may not be entirely immune from it, that money can create ideas, and that a great deal of money can create better ideas. Nothing could be wider of the mark. The bottleneck is always men. Imaginative men with fertile ideas related to the future. For them there is no substitute. Without them, the The money of a foundation will purchase nothing but motion and futility. The point is pertinent because of the age-old tendency of wealth to think of itself in terms of exaggerated importance. It can be of great and strategic assistance, but it is only a means to an end, and often, as history shows, a not indispensable means, and the end is creditable or otherwise, depending on the idea and the man behind whom the support is placed. In this respect, the writer believes the Rockefeller Foundation has been singularly fortunate. The trustees and the officers have reason to be grateful first to the founder and his clear-sighted advisors for the opportunity which they made possible. But for such success as the foundation has achieved, they have to thank the vision, the competence, the integrity, the wisdom, the skill, the tenacity, and the selflessness of those whose work they have sought to aid. And that is the end of the story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond B. Fosdick. Now, there are some appendices here, but as you can see, it's just lists of names. And I don't think you want me to just sit here and read a list of names and dates. But I can get, you can pause the video there if you want to dive into those, because I'm sure all of these people would be interesting people to look up. I mean, each one of these could have a whole story behind them, right? John Foster Dulles, we've seen that name before. He's certainly well known. And then Harry Emerson Fosdick. So this is Raymond B. Fosdick's brother, who was some kind of evangelical Christian or Baptist or something. Frederick T. Gates. His book is extremely expensive and hard to find. I'll give you the other page as well in case you want to pause here and dive into some of these names. You got Kellogg, Vernon L. Kellogg. So I wonder if that's of Kellogg's cornflakes fame. What else have we got? So the John D. Rockefeller, the third and junior. And I don't recognize many of the other names, but you can explore that. Might be fertile ground for further learning. And then these are the chief officers of the Rockefeller Foundation. John Foster Dulles, there again. And who else we got? Green, Thompson, Rind, Myers, Kirk, Beale. Well, not many names I know here, as I just said. So, but you got that on the record. You can dive into if you like. And then the rest of the book is just notes, and these are just the footnotes that go along with the chapters that we've read, and then an index at the back, which is really tiny text. And that, as they say, is that. So, what do you think? Did you enjoy it? Was it illuminating and valuable and beneficial to go through that page by page? Or should I have just read it on my own and then condensed it down into an hour, which is what I used to do for my book reviews? But I think this is more detailed. And I don't think there's many people just reading through books cover to cover in the way that I'm doing on the show. So, I could read it and then condense it into an hour and read, tell you the quotes that stood out to me. But what percentage of the book would you actually be getting then? Probably less than 1% and just a lot of me. Where this way, you actually get all of the book and it's on the record. And then you can kind of, even though I'm giving you my opinions and ideas about it, you can still make your own mind up because, the words are all there for you to interpret and to understand in the way that is unique to you. So I'll just have a quick look in the old chat. And what have we got? Let's see. Where did I go? Okay, so the last message I saw was Plutonian's phone died. Peter says, Predators? Is that it? Peter says, be careful. They may dust these books for non-lizard people. Frank says, the reading of a good book is nothing to be sniffed at. Yeah, thank you. I have no idea what's caused my nose to start running. It wasn't like this all day and before we started live streaming, but then it started. So I apologize again for not catching all the sniffles, but we're doing it live and these things happen sometimes, don't they? It could just be because it's a bit dusty. Maybe I've got too many dusty books behind me here and that's what's setting me off, yeah? So we needed a dictionary for the word, I think, propitious. And it's pronounced with propitious. Okay, so it's pronounced propitious. But I don't think, it looks like we didn't get a definition in the chat. So I'm going to have to look up propitious afterwards as well. I enjoy the live reads and discussion, Peter says. Thank you. I'm glad you do. Plutonian says, good job. I feel like what I caught was worth it and I only got 4 chapters. That's fantastic. I'm glad you got value from those 4. Just imagine what's in the rest of them though, right? Peter says, from previous comments, corrected the spell check. Cool. It's always good to be accurate with your spelling. Plutonian says, progress is science and technology, which is never ending according to these tyrant scientists. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Like, out with the old, in with the new. That's kind of their motto as well. And anything that is new must be good because it's new. But this is one of the ways that they can kind of herd us into this technocratic, scientist-controlled, brave new world vision that they have. And actually, that reminds me, on the topic of Brave New World, here's a book I got this week that we'll definitely read one time on the channel, and it is The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. So we've talked about the relationship between Francis Galton, the eugenicist, celebrated eugenicist, and I say that it's actually a quote here because it says there, his godfather was Sir Francis Galton, the celebrated eugenicist. So we talked about Francis Galton, we talked about Darwin and his theory of evolution or the preservation of the favored races. These are the ideas on which the scientific technocracy society is imagined. And these are the sort of foundational concepts that are rolled out and taught to the masses in order to allow the building of that world on top of them. And I got this one because Alan Watt references it in many, many talks. And I thought, sweet, let's get it. We'll read that one time. And then there was a wonderful quote on the inside here. Was it this bit? Yeah. What will life be like in this grave new world? So I might start using that one. Grave new world. That is really what they're trying to build, isn't it? It's not really a brave new world. It's a grave new world. Or maybe they're trying to build the brave new world, but it's actually turning into a grave new world. But yeah, we're told that every development, every scientific development that we are given is something to be celebrated, that it's totally new and that it's a breakthrough. When actually there could be all sorts of technologies that are hidden, that are kept secret, that are held back, that are stifled, that are written off. And we just get we get the technology which is going to be what's used to enslave us in the digital slavery system. Basically, that's what we get given. So nothing that could really emancipate people, nothing that could really unleash our potential as a species and as individuals, nothing like that. We got to be kept in this situation of not having enough. There's a better word for it than that. This situation of, what's the word that I'm grasping for? It's right there on the tip of my tongue. Where there's like artificial scarcity, where there is enough for everyone and there could be enough for everyone, and the reality is absolutely abundant, and there's more than enough capacity to grow more than enough food and give everyone little farms and beautiful houses and lots of space. But instead we're crowded and pushed and forced and coerced and jammed into these cities. Then we're fed lies that the world is overpopulated, and it actually does, from the vantage point of in a city, it actually does look like things are a bit overpopulated. But you get out to the countryside, you get a train ride from Scotland to Wales or something here in the UK, and most of it's empty. Or you get in a plane, fly somewhere, you take off the city you're in, you're like, oh yeah, it's built up, and then once you get to a certain height, it's just empty fields everywhere. Like, overpopulation is nonsense, but we're still pushed into these cities, and then we're fed a worldview that is poisonous, that leads us to make bad decisions and to become very detached and not invested in ourselves and each other and our communities, and building robust systems that will see our species prosper out into the future. Instead we're sold all this like sort of fake scientific progress, and then we're told that we're making all these breakthroughs and things are getting better when you just have to look out your window to see the state of things, unless you live in a really nice place, in which case I'm glad that you live in a really nice place. Good for you. Yeah, manufactured scarcity. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. So propitious. Okay, it's propitious, says Peter, but I think it looks like propitious to me. It means that something is expected to be favorable or successful and have a good outcome. Okay. So all our scientific endeavors, all this worship of scientism is propitious. But actually what it's leading to is a lot of slavery and a loss of freedom and a lot of control over our lives in every way conceivable and inconceivable. I think most people cannot conceive the level of control that this system is sort of intended to enact upon us. And I don't want to be, alarmist or anything, but that's just kind of what the books tell us, isn't it? Plutonian says, you can see what they were saying about the chaos of World War I and II and how these foundations, like stone, are older than time. They are just the shapers of stone and time. Yeah, well said. That's a really good way of looking at it. And look how long they've been around now. This is 100 years this thing's been going. And the current president was ex-Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation chief of something or other. So there's that revolving door again. And the people who stay in these organizations and run them at the top levels, they're the social planners. They're the people who are making the decisions, rolling out the agendas that the rest of us are living through. And yet we're just told it's kind of organic and, things are just happening without any sort of plan. Yet when you read the books and you look at the evidence, you can see the plan. So I think that is it for the Rockefeller Foundation. What an excellent choice that was. So thank you to everyone who voted in the last poll to get that book, to push that book to first place, because I'm really glad we read it. And I'm very happy we've got through that now. I'm certainly going to be chewing on that information for a long time and recalling it and using it when I'm discussing these sorts of events with people, and my understanding of the world and how these things are rolled out. There's foundations who tell you in their own books that they work off, in the shadows. They don't want to be front and center. They want to be off stage, giving the money, let the public facing bodies do the work and take the hit and the flack. And they're just quietly doing their thing off to the side. Sorry, another sniff got through there. LJ says birth rates going down, and that is part of the plan. Yeah, I think 100% that is. I don't even think you can argue against that. Like, I see it in my own circles and people I know. There's still, quite a few people I know my age and generation having children, but there's quite a few who aren't as well. And that's kind of scary and alarming, I would say. Peter says the club has been going for thousands of years. This is not new. Only some of the names have been changed, but not many. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Oh, LJ, you're talking about couples opting out of having children. There's a name for it. I think you're talking about DINKS. DINKS. Stands for double income, no kids. These people are DINKS. And you could probably do a quick YouTube search for that word and it'll show you them. Also, Truth Stream Media did a really good video about this as well. DINKS. Yeah, that's it. Dual income, no kids. Nice one, Dave. So we're done for Rockefeller Foundation. What do we have next? So let's get back here. We're going to have a look at the Telegram, and we're just going to scroll up a little bit to check out the old poll, which I'm going to close immediately after this broadcast. So I'm just going to save this. And the reason I have to save it is because if I want to open it in Brave browser for you to look at, I have to have it saved. See, I'm getting faster and better and smoother at doing this. Just have to talk. Okay, here it is. Here is the poll. This is where it stands, and this is the outcome. I'm announcing it, I'm calling it, and I'm shutting it down. So if you haven't voted yet, tough cookie. You should have voted sooner, shouldn't you? 81 people saw this, and we got 26 votes. and Fabian Freeway wins 54%. So sorry to those of you who voted for Rhodes, Sarah Gertrude Millen. We will get around to reading that. I do really want to read that one, and I'm very excited, and it's a good old one as well. So that'll be a fascinating artifact. Rockefeller, I think everyone's had a pretty good insight into Rockefellers now, so we'll take a break from the Rockefellers for a time being. That will be a good book to read at some point, though, because that's going to be the other side of the coin, and that'll be more of an expose on the crimes and the wrongdoings and the shady dealings of that group, from the point of view of somebody who was trying to expose it, rather than the point of view of the man who worked for them and wanted to paint it all in a rosy light. But we're going for Fabian Freeway by Rose L. Martin. So thank you to everybody who's voted on that. That is going to be coming up next. And just to give a little teaser and insight into it, before next broadcast, here is a different book about the Fabians. But this is Norman and Jean Mackenzie. Norman and Jean Mackenzie. And if you look, I don't know if you can see right there at the bottom. Actually, let's zoom in on that. Then you can read it a little bit easier. So we've got some names. George Bernard Shaw, Sidney Webb, and Beatrice Webb. So they are the founders of the London School of Economics, if I recall correctly. Then we've got Sidney Olivier. We've got Hubert Bland, and we've got Graham Wallace. So this book here is The First Fabians. This is pretty cheap. I found this Oxfam, $3.99. There you go, $3.99. Bish bash bosh. This one will not break the bank, and will give you a kind of primer and an intro to the Fabian Society. But we're not gonna read this one. I just wanted to get it on the radar, tell people about it. Interestingly, the first page of the book has a quote from H.G. Wells. Oh no, sorry, not a quote, but it's saying he and his wife, so the authors have collaborated on the time traveler, the life of H.G. Wells. So they wrote a biography about H.G. Wells, master propagandist and huge pusher, proponent, advocate, establishment backed writer and pusher of these kind of ideas, humanism and other such things. So I think these guys are probably going to be writing from a very sympathetic and standpoint. I think they're going to be on the side of the Fabians, in other words. And if we get in here, there's a quote that I've mentioned in the Telegram group a couple of times. And this is a quote from Lord Acton. So I just found out the other day that Lord Acton was the man who gave the quote, "Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely." I think I'm right in saying that because I saw it on. It might have even been an Alan Watt video, if I'm not mistaken. But he also said of the Fabians, they saw no divine part of Christianity, but divinified humanity or humanized religion, and taught that man was perfectible, but childhood perfect. I don't know about you, but that quote even sends kind of shivers down my spine as well. They divinified humanity. So this is humanism at its core. This is putting the human being, what makes you happy, at the center. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, is the kind of implication, the unspoken, unacknowledged implication of this kind of thinking. And they say right there, it's a humanized religion. So that is humanism all over. And if you need a kind of whistle-stop introduction to humanism, I did one at the start of part 12 last Thursday, or Thursday just gone. And then man was perfectible. So what does it mean that man is perfectible? Well, it means that, to me, that means eugenics. That means through things like through deliberate inventions and scientific progress, we can perfect man. Man is flawed, brutish, is kind of animalistic, but we can perfect him by raising him up and exalting man and employing our scientific rationalism and our techniques that we're developing, right? So that's kind of how I read it. It's got eugenics overtones. And then the very last bit, childhood perfect. I don't even, I would probably get banned for saying the connotations of what that speaks. You know, viewing children as perfect. You know, you can read it in different ways, but I would tend to lean towards the sort of sinister spin of these kind of things, knowing that the likes of like the Rockefellers, for example, were funding Alfred Kinsey, knowing that the whole clownfish rainbow movement, the logical progression of that is to incorporate people who have, I don't even know how to say it in code. Yeah, but I think you know what I'm getting at, right? So that quote contains a hell of a lot in it. And that is a book that you might want to get as a sort of prerequisite bit of reading, or just something to that maybe we could read at a later date. But that's not what we're reading next. What we're reading next is here. And I'm very excited indeed to get it read. Fabian Freeway, High Road to Socialism in the USA. That's going to be fantastic. And that is coming up next week. That is going to be, we're going to start that on, when are we going to start that? I suppose we're going to start that on Tuesday. The schedule is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and I'm sticking with it. So keep an eye out for that. 7 o'clock UK time. We're going to be starting Fabian Freeway. This one is definitely going to take us a while, as I said, to get through. So that last book, that was 13 parts. The Raymond Fosdick book was 13 parts. And, you know, that was 300 and something pages. 330, exactly 330 pages. This book is slightly bigger, and it's nearly 500 pages. So it's going to take us a while to get through. But I think it's going to be incredibly instructive and revealing and informative, and just I'm excited, very, very excited for that one, for sure. And I hope you are too. Okay, then. I think that is about wrapping up time. So a little bit of a shorter one tonight, so you can all go about your business and enjoy your Saturday evenings, whatever you have planned to do next. And LJ says, always been coming for the children. Yeah. I was saying the other day to a friend that the way children were treated over the last 4 years is the most shocking. It just blows my mind that more people aren't up in arms about it. Lockdowns, masking, staying home from school, distance learning, the torment, the trauma being done to children and young. It's overwhelming to contemplate the damage that was done during that time and how few people stood up to it and said anything about it. How many people, adults, parents, just went along with it and told their children to shut up and deal with it and cope with it as well, just because the television told them to. Staggering lack of common sense, of defensive instinct for the vulnerable members of our society. You know, it was really the young people and the old people that really had it worse than everybody else, and it was hard for everyone. But they seem to be really coming for the young and the old. And, you know, those of us who are, you know, kind of in between somewhere, we all had, you know, en masse, I'd say on an individual level, many of us, you know, did what we could. But en masse, on a bigger sort of scale, societal scale, I think that was an epic fail, what's known as an epic fail. And I shouldn't laugh. It's just laughter because, you know, it's either that or crying. But yeah, I think children and the elderly, they're really they're the ones that got the crosshairs on their backs. And we need to educate ourselves and learn about these schemes, right? And really make sure that we know what the hell's going on so that we can point it out and do something about it when you know they come back. Because like I said, they did 5 steps forward, then they did 3 steps back. The next push, you know, could be another 5 steps. What's it going to be? How's it going to look? We don't know. But all we can do in the meantime is get ourselves familiar with these people, these players, these characters, these actors, these institutions, these foundations, these philosophies, these worldviews, so that when we see them and when we see our loved ones and friends and family and colleagues repeating these and falling into these traps, we can call them out and just be like, hey, you know, that's secular humanism, and it is really dumb and it doesn't make any sense, and here's why. Or you know, that you don't have to be that direct. You could just do some kind of questioning. Oh, it's interesting that you think that, and lead people through. This is an art form in and of itself, but if you can lead people to to see their own contradictions through questioning, that can be a really powerful way to just snap people out of these kind of mind viruses that we're dealing with, you know? So, yeah, good luck and have fun doing that. It's a lot harder than I made it sound when I just described it there. Knowing the right questions to ask to lead people to a realization. But for example, a good example is slavery. You know, if somebody takes 100% of the fruit of your labor, it's slavery. Would you agree? And then the person's like, yeah. And then, well, what if that person takes 90% of the fruits of your labor? Is that still slavery? And be like, yeah, well, yeah, it is. Okay, well, what percent of your labor can be taken and it not be slavery? And they will say, well, 0. And you'd be like, yeah, all right. So when you're having your money, your wages docked automatically through this mechanism called taxation, wouldn't you agree that that is slavery? You know, it's these kind of questioning, these kind of stepwise ways of broaching subjects, and it often comes down to definitions of words and just leading someone on that journey by asking them, would you agree with this, and what is this, and would you define something this way? And then you'll get them into this kind of like bind where they don't really know how to describe it, you know. Peter says they want to get rid of those of us who still know how to do stuff without tech. Yeah. I mean, it's not even, I don't even think they want to get rid of people like that. I think they're just going to let you die off, and they're just going to make sure that young people don't get any information and have their entire lives completely dependent upon tech. So very well and good if you've got skills and knowledge and you know how to do stuff without tech, but you got to be making sure you're teaching that to young people and children. Because otherwise, what's the point you knowing it if it's knowledge that's just going to die with you? Not you, Pete, but you know, anyone in that situation. PW says, "Love to you, brother. Loving this book. Thank you. Love to you too. I appreciate that message. I really do." Peter says, "So, are you gonna lead us to religion?" I'm not going to lead you anywhere. I'll ask a lot of questions. It's up to you to make your own mind up. You probably shouldn't be following any leaders at this stage. I'm going to lead you to whatever's in the pages of the books that we read on this channel. And that's about it. I've said publicly before, I have no problem saying that I do pray, and it benefits my life. But I'm not going to lead anyone to anything because that's not my role. Peter says, "And the meek shall inherit the earth." Meek means teacher. We are the future because we still know stuff. Yeah, well said. I like that. That's a good message to wrap up on, I think. Keep learning, keep teaching other people, and really focus on the young people. And I know it's a bit ageist, maybe. I love old people, and I love all the old people who are in my family, and I learn a lot from old people, but it's really young people and future generations. They're the targets here, the unborn generations more so. So if you've got those kind of skills, repairing things, fixing things, building things, making things, maintaining things, that is essential critical knowledge that needs to be passed on. Really is. Adam, you're very welcome. And Dave, take care yourself too. So thank you everyone for being here. Take care of yourselves and each other. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. Put your feet up, chill out, make the most of it, do whatever you enjoy. Do things you love with the people you love. And I will hopefully see you on Tuesday, where we will begin our reading of the next book, Fabian Freeway. I'm excited. I hope you are too. And that's it. That's all from me for now. So good night and God bless.